Canada just dealt a serious blow to Russia and delivered a major boost to Ukraine, one that truly hits President Putin and his Kremlin cronies where it hurts most, their wallets. Canada sent approximately $1.7 billion to Ukraine. But here's the twist. That money didn't come from Canadian taxpayers. It came entirely from frozen Russian assets. In other words, Canada used Russia's own funds to support Ukraine. Not long after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, many nations around the world imposed sanctions aimed at weakening the Russian economy and pressuring the Kremlin to end the war. One major part of those sanctions was the freezing of Russian assets, funds and properties owned by individuals and entities connected to the Russian government, including state-owned companies, banks, oligarchs, and even top political figures. These frozen assets include foreign currency reserves, bank accounts, real estate, luxury goods, as well as shares and investments in Western markets. The Russian state and its wealthy elite have been unable to access, sell, transfer, or use these assets since the sanctions took effect. By the end of the first year of the war, around $300 billion worth of assets had been frozen globally, a staggering sum that has only grown since. Initially, freezing the assets was seen as a way to pressure Russia into backing down. But as the war dragged on, many world leaders began to consider whether those funds could be actively used to help Ukraine. This eventually led to the creation of a bold new initiative, the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration ERA loans. Launched in June 2024, the ERA Loans for Ukraine initiative is a G7-backed program involving Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Together, these nations have pledged to provide Ukraine with loans of up to $53 billion, which will be repaid using profits earned from the frozen Russian assets. It's a strategy that allows Ukraine's allies to effectively take money from Russia and direct it into Ukraine's war effort, turning the invader's resources into a weapon against itself. The move is expected to enrage Putin and the wealthy oligarchs whose assets are being used. Although the ERA program was announced in 2024, it took time to put the financial systems in place. But now the money is starting to flow, and Canada has taken a leading role. On June 30, Ukrainian Prime Minister Denys Shmyhal announced that Ukraine had received approximately $1.7 billion, 2.3 billion Canadian dollars from Canada through the ERA initiative. These funds are secured using profits from the frozen Russian assets. Shmyhal emphasized that Ukraine, with the help of its international partners, is making Russia pay for its aggression and the destruction it has caused. He noted that since the beginning of 2025, Ukraine has received around $17.6 billion in total through ERA funds. Canada has pledged a total of $5 billion Canadian dollars to the ERA initiative. And this is just the beginning. These funds are critical and will likely be used across a broad range of needs, from defense and security, supplying the army and supporting law enforcement, to research and development for military innovations. Some of the funding will also support humanitarian needs. Millions of Ukrainians have been internally displaced, forced to flee their homes due to the conflict. The money could help with food, shelter, healthcare, and the rebuilding of communities. Infrastructure restoration is another critical area. Energy substations, hospitals, and other vital services have suffered immense damage from Russian attacks. Ukraine must restore these facilities to maintain access to essential services like electricity, water, and medical care. Beyond Canada, the European Union has also played a major role. The European Commission was the first to disburse ERA funds in early 2025, starting with an initial €3 billion payment, followed by 4 additional €1 billion payments in subsequent months. Altogether, The EU is aiming to provide up to 18.1 billion euros this year alone through the initiative. Leaders like Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas have emphasized that this support ensures Russia pays for the destruction it has caused. Japan has also stepped up. On June 5, Japan and Ukraine signed a major loan agreement, with Japan transferring over 3 billion euros. This support covers Ukraine's economy, defense, and reconstruction. Ukraine's finance minister, Sergei Marchenko, praised Japan as a key ally, noting that it had already provided more than $8.5 billion in aid since the war began, including nearly $1 billion in non-repayable assistance. The United States committed $20 billion to the ERA initiative and transferred its first $1 billion payment in late 2024. The UK has pledged £2.26 billion, with £752 million already transferred earlier this year. Altogether, Ukraine has received nearly $18 billion in 2025 alone through ERA loans funded by profits from frozen Russian assets. This money is helping stabilize Ukraine's economy, rebuild infrastructure, and keep the war effort alive, all while draining resources from Russia. Importantly, this money doesn't touch the frozen assets themselves, only the profits. But Ukrainian officials argue that more could be done. Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, recently urged allies to go further by seizing and using the assets themselves, not just the interest they generate. He called for bold decisions, saying the assets could be used directly to buy weapons and boost Ukraine's defense industry and economy. The G7 has not yet agreed to fully seize the assets, but the idea is gaining traction, especially as support for Ukraine continues to grow across NATO nations. At a recent NATO summit in The Hague, Secretary General Mark Rutte confirmed that Europe and Canada are on track to provide even more financial support to Ukraine in 2025 than in 2024. Meanwhile, Russia is responding by dramatically increasing its own defense spending. In 2025, military spending accounts for over 6% of its GDP and more than 30% of its federal budget, the highest levels since the Cold War. Russia reportedly spent over $140 billion in defense in 2024 and is expected to spend even more this year. That includes salaries, arms development, logistics, and manufacturing. However, Russia's economy is beginning to show cracks. While unemployment is at historic lows, there's a massive labor shortage of around 2 million people. GDP growth has slowed significantly. Profits in the oil and gas sectors are down by about 50%. And Russia's National Welfare Fund, which had over $110 billion early 2022, is now down to just $36 billion. At the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, Russia's Minister for Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, warned that the country might be on the brink of a recession. Elvira Nabiullina, head of the Russian Central Bank, echoed the concern, saying that Russia's earlier wartime economic growth had been fueled by quickly depleting reserves and free resources like available labor and capital, which are now running dry. All this suggests that even as Russia ramps up military efforts, the economic cost is becoming unsustainable. For Putin, it presents a dangerous dilemma. If he continues the war, he risks further economic collapse and losing support from powerful oligarchs. But pulling back would be seen as a failure and a humiliation after years of bloodshed and propaganda. Putin appears trapped, his options narrowing, his economy weakening, and international pressure mounting. As G7 nations continue sending billions to Ukraine, including funds directly drawn from Russia's own frozen assets, Ukraine grows stronger, and Russia bleeds resources and influence by the day. If this trend continues, it could ultimately force Putin to the negotiating table. Until then, the war grinds on, and Ukraine, with help from its allies, remains resilient. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any updates. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.